Welcome to another episode of Frontlines on Intune Training with Jake and Jóhannes. We have special guest Simon here. Simon, you want to give us a little bit of an introduction?
Absolutely. My name is Simon. I work as a digital workplace architect for a consultant company in Sweden called Cygate, part of a telco named Telia. I'm a Microsoft Endpoint Manager MVP since October 2018. And been working with Intune since the very, very early days. So I think I'm closing in on the 10th anniversary. I'm a very odd bird in a way, because I do love like the business development side of it. I do talk a lot about the values that Microsoft Endpoint Manager can bring and Intune can bring to an organization. So I try to mix a lot of the so-called soft skills or core skills with the technology. And my tagline is basically the human side of IT, because I do think that's a topic we often happen to forget when we are implementing technology solutions, that in many cases there is a human being on the other side.
Absolutely.
I've also been known to speak around the globe pre a certain pandemic that you may have heard of. But we're soon getting back to that, and I've had a fantastic time during the pandemic as well, meeting a lot of people virtually, and also having to change the way I do present and do share knowledge. And happy to be here.
On the note of like the humanizing IT, I remember, I think it was my first day on my first IT job. My boss told me, "Remember, you're not managing computers. You're managing the people who use computers. That's who you're helping. And sometimes your job is going to be closer to being a psychiatrist or a shrink than being like fixing a computer." And I keep thinking back to that.
Yeah. And I do think that I had a fantastic experience when I started in IT. I worked at a call center supporting F-Secure at that point in time. And I had a person calling in and explained the issue. And I could see in the log that this issue had been up to like head development at F-Secure. Everyone had looked at it. No one had been able to solve it for months. So I asked him, like, okay, can we go through it again? And he explained what it were. And in the end, the trouble were that he were used to be using a Mac. So he didn't understand the concept of the start menu. So the only thing he really wanted were a shortcut to F-Secure on the desktop.
That's fantastic.
But no one had taken the time to explain it, so he couldn't find it in the start menu.
Mm-hmm.
So I just dragged out the icon on the desktop and asked, "Are you pleased?" "Yeah, thank you for solving my issue."
That's fantastic.
And my manager, when I explained it to my manager, he laughed for like 5 minutes, and then he said, "Okay, I know that. Just log out from your phone. Take as much time as you need. Explain what you have done, and escalate it back to level 4." So I think it's just about finding that we try to solve so many challenges with technology instead of just actually, like you say, speaking to the human being on the other side and trying to realize, okay, what is it that they actually want from this?
What is the actual problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, we would like to learn a little bit about the environments you've been working in.
Yeah.
So, what have you been using Like, you've been working with Intune for a very long time, but have you been utilizing Intune in those environments the entire time, or what were you using previously, or?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I've always been using Intune and working with Intune. So the experience I have had with other tools, apart from Config Manager, of course, which I've also been using extensively over the years, I have really not been using anything else. However, many of my customers have been using other things. But going back to the early days, like 2012, 13, a lot of organizations didn't have anything.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't manage their phones. They used Config Manager in many cases, but you had those really early scenarios where Intune were the first thing that really opened their eyes to some kind of, it wasn't really modern management at that point, but more mobile device management. So for a lot of organizations that I did work with, Intune were the first encounter with that. Today, it's more migrations, of course. And I would say that it's still a huge interest in migrating away from other MDM solutions, not necessarily because they are better or whatever it might be, but it's more of a way of trying to integrate as much as possible. That is also something I'm very passionate about. That, yeah, for sure there can be competing solutions that are fantastic at what they do, but if you don't have a good way of integrating it with other parts of your IT infrastructure, then you will end up in a situation where over time it will be very hard to maintain.
Yeah, the Microsoft sometimes feels like they're a bit unique in that they have the entire stack.
Yeah.
You can do the authentication, the management, pretty much all of it. Whereas if you want to split it all up, you have, a third-party identity provider, you have a third-party MDM, you have a third-party this and third-party that. It quickly becomes a mess.
Yeah.
And for those other... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and it also puts a lot of pressure on the IT staff, because then you need to learn so many other tools at the same time. So I do think that is a main driving force, and I do think that a lot of organizations are realizing that they need a strategic technology vendor. And that might be Microsoft, it might be VMware, it might be Apple, Citrix, or whatever. But they need something that they should build their technology stack on. And like you say, it's one or two other organizations that have all of those solutions that Microsoft can provide.
Absolutely. So with some of the different migrations and things that you've done, like from Config Manager, other MDM solutions, or RMM, I mean, you kind of mentioned there isn't usually a massive driving force, but was there a reason that people wanted to do the switch or make that change into Intune?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different reasons. One is that more and more organizations are, and it's a rather boring reason, but I think it's one of the main reasons. You get Intune with the licenses you purchase regardless.
Yeah.
And it's a boring reason, but it also shows exactly what we just said. You get the integrations. It's already there. And a lot of organizations are quickly realizing that when they are there, when they have migrated, that why didn't we do this earlier? Because the user experience, I would say, is the second reason. It's so well integrated into the main applications that we use in an IT organization today. Like, what are we using in our phones that we want to manage and protect with Intune? Yeah, it's the Microsoft apps in many cases. So the user experience is the other driver. And the third driver, I think, is the increased focus on data security on devices. Many of the organizations I have, and one of the main aspects I support them with, is finding that human bit again. So when we are trying to protect the data on the device, we usually tell the story around that, yeah, we are protecting this data, but by protecting the organization's data, we are also separating that away from your personal information that might be on the same device. So we're actually protecting your integrity to some extent. And for you, dear user, it's transparent. So the data protection and the user experience works very well together. And since a lot of organizations already have something in terms of licenses, it's a no-brainer for a lot of organizations to make that switch.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's the user experience is something a lot of people overlook. Think about it. Like, single sign-on has been a feature for 20 years. And it's still a killer feature. It's the best thing you can set up. You just log on and you never have to do anything again. You can just open the website, open the app, open the file, whatever. It just works.
There's the other side of that, though, too. There's the people that ignore it, and there's the people that go way farther than they possibly should. Like, I have to set every start menu needs to be custom. Every bookmark needs to be an edge. There's definitely the two extremes. You got to find that healthy balance that makes everyone happy.
Mm. Oh, absolutely.
And I do fully agree that, and you also have the security aspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get rid of passwords. How do we do that? Well, we make it simpler not to sign in. So by implementing single sign-on, regardless of how you do it, you also benefit from a security point of view. So why haven't we done it until now? And I think that goes back to the integration side, that if we... A lot of line of business apps still have their own identity solution built in or something, and that is a pain. So when we are now at a stage where most applications and solutions are supporting either Azure AD or AD, there's really no blockers for single sign-on.
Yeah.
And for some of those older apps, we may know the solution, which is do Azure App Proxy or a couple other things, but it's not really easy to just go up to your everyday admin and say, hey, go set up Azure App Proxy for this app. It's not a trivial thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But...
And I do think we'll come back to that, the user experience side of Intune. Mm-hmm. And I have some quite interesting stories to share around, and it around the user experience and the user expectations on their devices. And I think you either will get a laugh at how Sweden works in terms of how spoiled we can be at some points, but also I think you can learn a lot from the challenges that we may oversee in time. So we'll get back to that, but I think that's what drives me in all the Intune projects I'm involved in, that we need to focus on that. We need to sell this solution and not sell it to the admins, because admins love it, and whoever purchase solutions for an IT department loves it too. But we need to make the users want that management experience. And I've had customers that after meetings where I've presented Intune and say, yeah, we love this. Fantastic. We want you to help out with it. But we don't want you to implement it. We want you to be internal marketing, because you tell the story much better than we possibly could.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very.
Jake, I think it's your turn.
I'll go again. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
So with obviously you deal with a bunch of different clients. So everybody's kind of got a different story. But are there any usually major company politics that might get in the way that block you from maybe doing a certain change, or the quote unquote recommended approach or best practice in some cases?
Or do they want to go too fast?
Yeah.
You ever encounter something like that?
Yeah. So let's start with the first thing that's been more obvious over the last years than it were back in the days. And it might be a Swedish or Nordic situation, but I do think that if it isn't a global challenge, it will become that in a very near future. So it's rather common with my customers that a lot of the people that works there get a phone from their employer. And since I work for a telco now, and you look back at it, the telco I work for was actually the second telco in the world after AT&T. So we have had all of that. We have super fast networks. In Finland, they have never had a data limit on any of their mobile connections.
I'm jealous.
So they can, yeah. So we're from a very early point, we have been allowed to use our company phones in our private lives, making phone calls, things like that. It's been a perk when you get employed. It's something to add on to that. That creates a quite interesting situation when you get to the point where you want to manage the device. So a customer I worked with a year ago or so, we did a survey before we started the Intune implementation. And over half of that organization they saw their device as their device. It was a benefit. It was not a work tool. So we actually had a few people, when we said that we're now going to manage your device, that went to HR and required a raise to the same amount as the value of the phone, because they saw it that the benefit were taken away from them when we started to manage a phone that belonged to their employer.
That is interesting.
But I do think that if it may not be that extreme in all cases, but I do think that the phones we have and that we might be given by our employer are many times seen as our device. It's very personal to a lot of us to use it. And if you don't take that into account, then you get into these challenges with rollouts that never ends, all the pushback you can ever imagine for every little change you go through. So now when I do implementations, I start there. How do this organization view their devices? And what challenges will that give me at a later stage? And if they see it as a personal device that is theirs, then we need to take that into account, adopt policies, and possibly also do other things outside of Intune, like look at acceptable use policies, things like that, to be successful. And that is independent, really, if it's a private or public sector customer, if it's small or large. It's the same view of it, and I think it will be more and more common, and I think it also is highly adaptable to BYOD scenarios. How do we protect that? How do we ensure that the person using the device can still feel safe and that they are empowered to use the device in a way that supports them?
Absolutely.
We had that discussion where I work a few years ago about MDM. You know, hey, we have Intune, we can do all the things. And but I had a bit of pushback because we don't own all of these devices, and managing a device you do not own, whether it's like we actually own it or they own it, you know, if they consider it a personal device, that is a very, very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
And they make
you
it,
don't want
you know,
to be responsible for wiping out someone's baby photos.
Yeah.
That's going to be a bad day at work.
I would have just handed my resignation that day.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, your pictures are gone. I'm gone too.
Yeah.
But I mean, they make it to a degree a little bit easier, at least on like the cellular side, because you have things like work profiles and different things like that where you can really segregate. Like, this is the work stuff, and then all the rest is, you know, you go crazy, take all the baby pictures you want. I would say not so much on the Windows side yet, but I think they're getting there. You could obviously enroll your devices and do like whip and man policies, different things like that. But it'll be interesting to see that like scenario. I know like here in the States, there are definitely scenarios like that, but for the most part, at least from what I've seen, it's very much like a work pays for that phone. It's a work phone, and we're going to do what we want with it. Like whether or not they did something previous or they're just adding it now, it's company property at the end of the day. So
that is probably this. I'm sure Simon can back this up. This is probably one of those big cultural differences between the Nordics and the US.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do think so. I've been working, but I do think that at the same time, I'm working with a very large Swedish industry customer currently, and they are rolling out Intune to, in the end, 55,000 Windows devices and at least the equal amount of mobile devices. It's a fantastic project to be part of. But what I love the most with that is getting all of those cultural challenges. That it's a very different thing to go to Germany and talk to them about one thing, because there the integrity side it's front and center at every given point. I do even think that like Copy, so company owned, personally enabled, or whatever Google calls it these days, Intune has its own name for it, where you have a fully managed device, but you have the work profile. That was actually implemented due to a lot of German customers wanting that feature, because it was something they required to both have control of the device while maintaining the integrity of the user. And then you have the states where it's much more common with real BYOD and everything that comes with that, and where in many cases the employer have a bigger saying than they might have in the Nordics and in Europe in general. And then you have like the South Americas, Africa, Asia, where it's more focused on finding the cost efficiency in a way, and where you might have other kinds of limitations, especially in China from a technology point of view in terms of what you can use. And to navigate that isn't a technology challenge. It's really around figuring out what is the key to this country or this part of the world to be successful. And some things I would love if it were as it is in the US in terms of, but this is something we do, and it's fully reasonable that we do it. And sometimes that can create other challenges in terms of getting a huge amount of shadow IT or other kinds of pushback. Mm-hmm. So, but that's what I love about working as an international way, because I do encounter fantastic humans and fantastic challenges and fantastic opportunities.
Okay, so next question. When it comes to migrations, granted it's different because you're a consultant and you meet a lot of different customers. How long do they usually take, and what resources do you need to get them going, and like the beginning, middle, and end?
I think the main takeaway I've had over the last couple of years in terms of migrations is that and a lot of people will not agree with me, the only successful way to do a migration to Intune is by using conditional access.
Oh.
I would say that it's the quickest way to reach the goals and the quickest way to roll it out with the minimal user interaction and without having a ton of people communicating, helping out, supporting a lot of humans in enrolling their devices. There are a lot of things to ease that migration in third-party products, or of course great guides that is available from both the community and consultants and Microsoft themselves. But I do think that conditional access have been the main driver and the biggest success in terms of whatever you're migrating from, you usually don't have conditional access integrated with other MDMs, even though you can. So by saying that now, if you want to reach your email tomorrow, you will have to go through this wizard. If you have something there, so if you enforce it either with MAM or with MDM, I think that's the absolute quickest way. Because if you try to get this rolling on your own and by just hoping that a lot of people will volunteer and say, let me go first, it will be these huge migration projects that takes years and where you have basically to replace phones. And that scenario with conditional access works as long as you don't have to reset the device. Mm-hmm. Because I also encountered a lot of organizations that started with some kind of MDM or Intune for the matter a couple of years back and didn't realize how important it were, especially for iOS devices, to supervise them.
Yeah.
And then you have to reset them. And that is, of course, a much more challenging scenario, but the same goes for Android if you want them to be in a copy state or a fully managed state. And at that point, it's either to do a huge replacement or switch around phones. That's the quickest way. But in practice, you instead need to find other means of being successful with that. But conditional access have been the best and most powerful tool to really speed up the migrations.
That is a very interesting take.
I've
I
never
like to
even
think that
thought
I
of
keep
that,
myself.
honestly.
Yeah, I like to think that I keep myself well informed in the community, but I've never heard anyone say that. But now that you have said it, it makes so
sense.
much sense. Because people will people are willing to jump through quite a few hoops to get to their data. I want my
they do
email.
clone
I'll
management,
just,
they greenfield it.
yeah.
I mean, that's usually the scenarios you hear about. I think the cultural difference there comes into play. Like on the U.S. side, I don't think you get away with it to a degree. For some people, it's like you're forcing this. I have to run through this wizard. Well, I can't do that right now. I'm busy, or I'm working on something else. You would never hear the end of it. You have the complaints from the user side of things, and at least over here, it's very much the like if I'm moving to Intune, I'm gonna when they get their new device, that's when we're gonna do it. We're not gonna do it to their existing, or we're not gonna switch it over right away. But I think that conditional access approach is definitely something to look at. That's super interesting.
Then if you give them enough time to prepare, I think that you're right on point there, that if you give a person a week's notice, at this point we will enforce a policy, they will get furious. It's essential to understand like the work year, work month for a person. When is this suitable for a particular group of employees? And adopt to that. So you don't want to do, if you have a school environment, you don't want to do this at the beginning or the end of a semester, as an example. But you might be able to do it if you give them a 2-month long period. So basically saying you have 8 weeks. Anytime during these 8 weeks, you're free to do this migration. We will help you, all of that. But at this date, you can't choose. We have given you 8 weeks to find half an hour at the most. If you can't find half an hour in 8 weeks, it's not an IT problem. Then you need to speak to HR.
Yeah. Well, even with those continued emails and things like that, you're always going to have that one person that's like, what emails? I never got them.
Yeah.
But
and you always have that. And then focus on the 90% that actually were reading their emails, because it is hard. And in the end, if you have those 10%, the 90%
you're 90% of the way there now.
Exactly. And the 10%, okay, if you don't do this, what about getting a new phone early? Because it's likely cheaper to buy that person a new phone and just exchange it, rather than trying to convince that person to do this. So I think that's the combination of technology and communicating in a way that's understandable to a user.
Yeah, it's understanding your customers, I guess. Yeah. I mean, for example, where I work, we generally roll out all kinds of changes all the time. But when it comes to our finance division, it cannot, under any circumstances, happen in the last week of the month.
Yeah.
Because then they're doing payroll. And if payroll is delayed 5 minutes, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
So they just had to shift their schedule to a week early, and they didn't care at all. Like, okay, fine, we can reboot in the middle of the day, we don't care. But at the end of the month, no way.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that in the end, that's really... I meet a lot of IT people, and I ask them, do you understand what your organization is actually doing? What is your core business? And I meet a lot of people that don't know that. Like, they say that we do this, we do that, but that's not their core business. They might even not understand how what they do impact the organization, and why it might be a fully reasonable thing to, as a very, like, run Windows XP still. Yeah, if it's connecting to a smelting mill in the steel industry, to change that, it's hundreds of millions.
Yeah. So
don't try to change that. Let them run Windows XP and focus on other things. So by just understanding how it impacts and adopt to that, you will also get tons of plus points. Because if you can say to it, and you can lie, basically you can say to a user that, we adopted our schedule based on your needs. It doesn't have to be true, But as long as the schedule fits their needs, they will be happy. Like, we create the reality we tell them. And as long as they are happy, it doesn't matter.
It's a good point that with IT departments that are isolated from the business. I've noticed this over the years, where you meet IT people who, well, they might not say it explicitly, but it's basically, we are here to do computer stuff. We don't care about the rest. And then inevitably, someone who owns the company will start wondering, do these guys bring any value to the business? Like, why am I paying these guys a lot of money and they're not helping?
Someone's got to run that really old, Outlook server, man.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why you have the Exchange server, to keep the IT department alive.
We once found there was a small hydroelectric dam. It was tiny, but it was operated by a laptop that was like this thick, and it ran, I think, Windows NT, and it broke. Like, okay, now the dam doesn't work anymore, so what do we do? Well, we decided, this clearly fixing this is going to cost $1 million, so that's not going to happen. So we ended up having to go on eBay, finding spare parts for the laptop, and we fixed it. And we fixed it, but please, you should reconsider this going forward. And everyone just loved it. Instead of giving them the tired old speech of why didn't you just buy a new one out of the gate? Because that's not how this works.
I'm amazed it wasn't the hard drive that failed on the device.
It was the hard drive that failed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I do think that, and it's something that we talk a lot about in the podcast, which I'm a co-host on, Knee Deep in Tech, that IT has no value in itself. Mm-hmm. And that is only the old way of looking at it. Today, we are only supporting organization, an essential one. But if we don't provide value, if we don't understand the business we are supporting, they will find other ways. We are replaceable.
You're viewed as a cost center. That's the old...
Yeah.
Because costing us money, not bringing in a benefit.
And I think IT security is that's the focal point of all of that. So that's, again, what I'm trying to really get out in the especially Swedish, but also international cybersecurity community, that we can be as hacky as we want, go around in our hoodies and be really scary and scare everyone with the horror stories we have experienced. But at the end of the day, IT security needs to provide more value. Yes. We can't do MDM. We can't have the only argument that we will make your devices more secure, because no one will buy that if it lowers the income of the organization or makes it harder to achieve business goals. We need to provide value, and if we can't create a story that's real for an organization in why they should use Intune and how that will add business value, it won't happen.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I've definitely met some IT InfoSec people over the years who they're not so much in a bubble. They are in a 500-kilometer high ivory tower, and they just have no idea how the business runs.
Well, the answer is no to any question you ask them.
Yeah.
Can we do this? No. What about the no? Yeah. But we need to purchase another security tool. Seems what you get. Now, we kind of talked about it, or at least you mentioned it a little bit briefly earlier, as far as licensing is concerned. A lot of the times it's just included. But for some of the businesses that you work with that maybe didn't have licensing previously, is there a go-to license that you normally go to? Like, you got your E3, E5, different variants like that?
And I'm a very odd person in a way that I actually love to talk about licensing. Okay. Which makes me probably unique on a global scale. But I kind of like it because it's a good story to tell. When you can explain a license, you're basically the hero of the day. And M365 Maps and what Aaron Dinage have been doing for licensing.
Oh, yes.
he has revolutionized Microsoft licensing because it's a fantastic solution and everyone gets it. Then what all of these boxes actually contains, that's another thing, but that's what we should keep track of. So I work with organizations that are from a few users up to 100,000 or something like that. And for the small medium business, as Microsoft, and we look at it in the Nordics, in many cases, you have those 1 user to 300 users. Then when you go larger than that, it's very different dependent on where you are in the world. But if we start with the smaller ones, which I really enjoy working with, I think the M365 Business Premium SKU, that's my absolute favorite Microsoft license because it's so much value for a relatively low amount of money. It might be a lot for that small business owner, but when you look at how much you get and how relatively simple it is to integrate, especially now when we got Defender for Endpoint in it, it's a fantastic SKU. And the only thing I really recommend to small businesses, because then they have everything and it's integrated and it's easy to implement and you can usually get rid of so many other things if you have that. So Business Premium is my absolute favorite. Then when you look at the slightly larger organizations, I tend, and I think this is also very different dependent on where you are in the world, but I think we are at a point where E3 is somewhat of a standard. And then you add on E5 security to it, but you already have Intune in E3. What I'm seeing a little bigger interest in is the F SKUs.
Because the frontline workers.
Yeah. Because now when you have the F3 and you have the F5 add-ons, it makes a lot of sense because that's been a challenge. If you look at a healthcare provider or a municipality in Sweden, you usually have, say, if you're 10,000 people, 7,000 of them are in practice frontline workers. And up until the higher F SKUs, it was super expensive to ensure that all of these were protected accordingly. And you really, in many cases, needed to have licenses for everyone based on how some of the features that you want in identity protection and so on works. So a lot of the discussions I'm having now is finding how to work with an F SKU, because you have some limitations in terms of collaboration, but you get all of the goodies from the security side, including Intune. So I would say that organizations are either moving into the direction of bumping up their E3s or moving towards F SKUs. That's the two main discussions I'm having. We also see a bigger interest in E5, but E5 is a very specific license. You really need to have those. Like when we look at the full E5, it's security, it's compliance, and then you have either voice or Power BI. And it's easy enough to sell compliance or security, but you also need a third to really make a difference. And it's much, and it's much harder to make an organization move fully into Teams voice or find the need of having Power BI Pro to everyone. So it's usually E3 plus either E5 security or E5 compliance, or they're moving towards the F SKUs for the plus 300 seats.
One of the things I found interesting with the frontline workers and the F SKUs in general is that they have completely different problems that need to be addressed. So basically, if you are a user who has an E3 license, most likely has a laptop or desktop and sits in front of it every day.
Yeah.
Whereas someone with an F SKU, they might not have a computer at all. They might only have a phone.
Mm-hmm.
That is just completely different. Maybe they don't even have a password. Or an email account even. We just use our phone numbers for everything. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I do think it's still why it's often also overlooked from a security point of view. That why would we protect these? They do not have any permissions. They do not have this or that. But dependent on how you set up your tenant, they actually might be able to do things that you wouldn't expect them to be able to do because they have an actual account. They're still a user inside of the environment. If you don't take care of your app permissions, if you allow them to send internal emails, if you allow them to do other things, it might actually be a security concern even for a frontline worker. And a lot of frontline workers are, I think a lot of the FSQs are also used for consultants, actually. So when I bring my own device, or when I get, as we spoke about before we started the recording, Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365 have a virtual machine, I still need to protect that. Or if I decide that, okay, I'm bringing my own device, but you're welcome to manage it if that's a policy you have as an organization, then you need to protect that. So Frontline, I think, started with exactly what you said, Jóhannes, that it's that frontline worker where you don't have anything other than a phone number, and you might have your own phone or no phone at all. But it's now extending to a group of people that might use a device once in a while.
Yeah.
It might be a nurse. It might be someone at the factory floor that actually might use a device from time to time, and therefore have access and might use their credentials in places they shouldn't.
Okay. So when it comes to the Windows side of all this, have you used Autopilot? And if so, have you been using Azure AD Join? Have you been using hybrid Azure AD Join? And which one would you recommend?
Oh,
We have a preferred answer to this, but obviously we want to hear your side.
and sometimes NDAs are hard, so I won't be able to tell you all of the stories. But I do think that hybrid Azure AD Join is used in a way it was never intended to be used as. I don't know how many organizations I meet that, going back to conditional access, I absolutely love having the discussion with an organization that say, yeah, let's allow hybrid Azure AD Join. We prefer to use that. If they are hybrid Azure AD joined, we trust them and they get access. And then you take your little needle and you splash the bubble in saying that, okay, so what do I need as an attacker to create myself a hybrid Azure AD joined device? Nothing. It's a regular user account if you have the default AD settings.
Yeah, 5
so
enrollments.
Yeah. So it's basically what you're saying when you use hybrid Azure AD join in your conditional access policy is, I'm taking responsibility. I'm taking responsibility as an IT admin that all of these devices are actually secure and compliant. And that hybrid Azure AD join is a migration path, nothing else. It was never, ever intended as an end state for anyone. And we really shouldn't talk about hybrid Azure AD join in Autopilot, because
my man.
yeah, but it's like the time organizations spend to make that work, and how accepting we are in that case. Like, we really want our devices in AD, so let's wait 45 minutes for this to complete, hopefully. And you would never accept a wait time of 45 minutes in Config Manager, and still you feel that you're modern in using Autopilot.
And that's the key word used earlier, is work. When it works, even after doing all of the initial setup.
Yeah. So I think that if you are deploying new devices today and you are using hybrid Azure AD join, you're in for a 3-year mess And if you aren't prepared, and this is a very unpopular opinion, if you aren't prepared to reinstall those devices to get to Azure AD Join, then you need to rethink. Because I don't see that you will get a migration path. It was never intended to be. Once at this point in time, if you're doing hybrid Azure AD Join, you're doing it wrong. If you're building a new workplace today with Windows devices, you either do AD Join because you have those scenarios, and then you most likely use Config Manager, or you do Azure AD Join because that will work in a majority of cases. And now with everything fantastic they've added to Azure AD, there are very few things that doesn't work.
One thing I've noticed that I've met some people who insist that, well, we can't do Azure AD because we have so and so many devices that run a ridiculously expensive software, and it just doesn't work. There's just no way. Sometimes these people are in really specialized fields, like work at hospitals and whatnot. And I get it. Okay, that's a business case. But that's maybe 5% of your devices. The other 95, they can be Azure AD joined just fine. And I think people should plan around that. Manage the majority, and then you can take care of the edge cases.
Yeah, and also I think that, and I'm slightly passionate about this.
Go for it.
When you today, if you see Azure AD Join or hybrid Azure AD Join, or if you see device management as an isolated part of IT, you will never be successful. Because I don't know how many times you meet an organization and you wonder, okay, why are you doing hybrid Azure AD Join? Or like you said, why are you blocking this technology? And they say, yeah, we have these cases where we can't do this and that. And then you say, okay, but if you speak to the ones that manage this app, or if you find a way to run this app in another way, could we then modernize the actual endpoint? So when I look at it from that perspective and find a customer that today might be AD joined or hybrid AD join, and I say, okay, let's move to Azure AD join. And they say, yeah, we have this app, it requires AD. Okay, if that is the case, virtualize it. Instead of stopping the modernization of all of your physical endpoints due to this one app or 10 apps or 100 apps, keep your AD. AD will be around for a long time. Keep it, virtualize it using your preferred virtualization solution, modernize the endpoint, and run that app as a virtual one. So you need to be more, you don't have to solve everything on your own. You don't have to solve everything with Intune. You don't have to solve everything with Azure AD. You can actually work together as an IT department to achieve the end goal. And that shouldn't stop you from being creative. So by just finding new ways of solving old challenges, you might actually get one step on the way.
And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up is they come across that first issue that affects the 5% and they immediately just say, we can't do it. We can't do it.
Yeah.
But then you look at like what solution they were using previously.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you implemented that, could you do everything that you needed to do on all your devices, or did you find a way to work around or implement it in another way to make everything cohesive and work together? So,
I've actually found a quote I really love. And it's from I think it's from Piglet's movie, where Winnie the Pooh says, I usually get to where I want by moving away from where I am. But a lot of IT people try to get to where they want, but stay where they are. And that's not working.
They set up camp and they defend it and they don't.
Yeah. And it's like, we want to modernize, but we don't want to change the way we work. You need to move away from where you are to get to where you want to be. You can't do both.
Especially in IT, everything is constantly changing. There's always a newer, better way or potentially better way, quote, on how to do
Yeah.
things. So you need to constantly be evolving in order to get down that path.
Yeah.
Now, we kind of already talked about part of this next question as far as like on-prem resources. You mentioned like for applications, virtualize them with whatever your preferred method is. But for those companies that still are doing things like, and this is obviously your Azure AD bound at this point, you're not hybrid, you're not worrying about that. But what do you do for those clients that still have like on-prem like file shares and print servers and different things like that?
Yeah, so I'm a person that really sees the value in doing both BAT endpoints, so traditional, even though it's Intune managed Windows devices or things like that, and combine that with virtualization solutions. I do think that's a very powerful, rather simple approach of solving those challenges. So if you have a file share and you, for whatever reason, can't migrate it to SharePoint or OneDrive or Teams, it's in many cases either, again, a people problem, that we have always have our shared E drive or X drive or whatever it is, and we're used to it. Well, that shouldn't keep you in running this file server. But it's also the other way around, that, okay, it's usually the file server is there. I work a lot with media organizations or media companies, and they actually need their file servers because they need that super low latency and a huge amount of performance that is very hard to achieve even in the cloud today. But then you have an application that connects to it. And in one of my customers' cases, they are doing huge video editing projects, they virtualized that. And that meant that they really could do a ton of other things. They could modernize their endpoints. They could minimize the amount of hardwares that they needed. They would found a way to go around the lack of components in the hardware today for their specialized workstations. And they are happy with that. That's basically what they have on-prem. So, and they will keep it because the solution works. And they are accessing it. So the file share isn't the important thing. It's what you use the file share for that should drive that. But I do think that is my preferred approach. Virtualize, find other ways, because it's still more modern than connecting using a VPN or just keeping an AD because of that. Other things I do see that still either requires on-prem resources or which require really server management, even though it might be in the cloud. That's things like PKI, which we are now seeing moving to more self-signed or service-based certificate solutions. And then you also have, like when it's from a InfoSec point of view, that you can't put things in the cloud. And come to Sweden and you should listen to how afraid we are of the US government. That's an episode in it. So
a lot of people here are too.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that like there are a lot of good reasons why you keep some things on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're back to, should you consume it as if it is a server, or should you actually put it somewhere else, which is a more cloud similar delivery model? But the short answer, if you have on-prem resources, I would choose virtualization most days of the week and focus on the use case rather than what the server feature that you might have enabled on it actually does.
Awesome.
Okay, so we're about to wrap this up. What about your future plans? Or I guess since you're a consultant, you can't really talk about the next big project. But is there anything in the future, features you're looking forward to, or changes, or granted, all of us have an NDA, so
No, I do think that the luxury I have is that I'm a very odd bird in being a consultant. I work a lot as an evangelist and an inspirator, and help organizations at a rather early stage, and then help them with strategies today more than actually managing tech. I do, however, love to work with Intune, and then it's come to a point where that's when I relax, when I get to, okay, you need to do this assignment, we need to help this customer out, you should do this and this. Great. And I also work a lot with Microsoft and the product teams as part of the MVP program in developing the solutions, and that really keeps me up to date. But the projects I look forward to is now when the pandemic is over, big air quotes. A lot of organizations are now getting to the point where they are forced to make a decision. How will our workplace for the future look? What will we offer our users? What strategy will we take in terms of working from anywhere, working at an office, and where I'm involved in several of those projects and really try to help organizations in finding their strategy. And that's super exciting because I get to meet so many people in so many different functions, everywhere from sustainability to HR to finance to people that work on factory floors, healthcare, everything, and finding good ways of solving their everyday challenges. And that's what I truly, deeply love with my job. And also being that challenger in terms of a lot of people think that the only proper way of doing a digital workplace or a workplace after the pandemic is to allow a flexible and fully flexible work style. And I don't agree. As an example, my employer, which is a telco, what we do is connecting people everywhere with the fastest broadbands on the planet. And we have an office first strategy.
Okay.
And the reason is very simple. We believe that that's where culture is created and where you meet people. But it doesn't mean that you can't work everywhere. And a lot of us are. We will be working permanently from wherever we want. It means that we will invest in our offices. Because in practice, why do we like to work from home? Yeah, there are tons of great reasons. You don't have to commute. You can live wherever you want. All of those things. It's fantastic. But I meet so many people that say, I'm more productive at home, or I have a better performance. I can do better Teams meetings when I'm at home than when I'm in the office. So when I talk about an office first strategy with several of my customers, it's about, we need to ensure that your office is something your employees want to visit. And if that is not to work, if that is to hang out and have a good cup of coffee, great. It's not just about IT. But we should never get to the point where someone feels that I can't do my work as good in an office as I could at home. It should be a choice of, how do I make my life work by having the choice of working from home or from an office? If you then choose to go for an all remote working strategy, which a lot of organizations are, and that's fantastic, absolutely invest in that. Do not stay with your offices, but focus all your attention on enabling that fantastic experience wherever they are. But you can't really do both. So that's the questions I hope to help organizations to answer in the coming year or so. And then we have, like the project I mentioned earlier, it's a fantastic customer to work with, which really have embraced that thought of, let's go modern. They are going Azure AD only. They are doing Windows 11. They are doing Intune only management. They are doing modernization of apps. They're doing everything at a super large scale across 100 countries. And it's been a fantastic journey to be part of. And during this year, they will actually start that broader rollout. So that's something I'm looking forward to as well.
Awesome.
Okay, I think
Well, thanks for your time. We really appreciate
thanks for
it.
your time, man.
But I really enjoy being here, and thank you for letting me speak about what I'm passionate about, and having your input. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, we'll obviously include all your socials and everything down below. Obviously, to the viewers out there, if you have any questions for Simon, feel free to write them down there. We'll let them know.
Absolutely.
But with that, have a fantastic rest of everyone's day.
Thank you.